Wednesday morning it is. Good morning to you, Grenada, Carriacou, Petite Martinique, the rest of the Eastern Caribbean. To you, wherever you are, it's exactly 9 o'clock in the studios of Classic 105.5 and 105.9 on the FM band, and certainly across the rest of the Eastern Caribbean. Good morning to you and welcome to The Point for today, the 16th day of the month of March. My guest this morning, PS in the Ministry of Finance, Mike Sylvester, and certainly want to say thanks to him for being part of this morning's program. And I want to say a special welcome to those of you that's joining us via GBN Television, Channel 7, Channel 11, and Channel 20. Those of you that's be chiming in via our Facebook page, YouTube channel, or via the World Wide Web at www.gbn.gd. And certainly our constant followers on Classic 105.5 and 105.9. We say thanks for being part of the program. Another episode that is off to the point. Good morning to you, Mr. Alexis, Mr. Sylvester. How are you?
Good morning, Mr. Cadore. I'm very fine. Thank you very much.
All is well?
All is well, all is well. And let me say good morning to, of course, you and your listening and viewing audience. And thank you for having me on the program.
Thank you for being here. We have 1 hour. We're going to see how fast a number of things to discuss, but we'll see how far we can go. Let us start, Mike, as you can well appreciate, with the most topical thing. We've continued to monitor and follow what is now the 21st, 22nd day, the war in Ukraine. And the truth is, Mike, that when these things happen, there are those of us who seem to think it happens in isolation, and that has nothing to do with us. And there are folks like you and I. It happens that we start taking a different perspective on it, because certainly we know when whatever happens in Europe, in the Western Hemisphere, it starts to affect market prices, whether it's oil, the wheat. Most of the Ukraine supplies 45% of the wheat to the world. Your thoughts on what's happening in Ukraine and its potential to offset what we're trying to restore, coming off of the heels of what has been a really debilitating global pandemic?
Well, yeah. Thank you again. I think a very good start to the conversation. So let me just provide some context, and then I'll zero in on the whole Russia-Ukraine conflict. So we've just conducted the Article 4 consultation with the IMF. You know, the IMF conducts Article 4 surveillance in 189 countries out of 196, and basically to assess economic developments, recent economic developments. And what we have seen here in Grenada, for example, is that we would have started, and I would say a strong, you can say modest, depending on how you want to look at it, recovery from the major decline that we had in 2020. The economy declined then by 13.8%, as you recall. And of course, the growth last year was in the region of 5.66%. So that is significant in terms of a recovery. What you're seeing happening now is that we are being hit by another shock. So where, for example, we are projecting that the recovery will continue to strengthen and be bolstered, we now have to face with a major shock. And just to talk about the risk in terms of the output that we are seeing, we know, for example, that the pandemic is not yet over. So we have had a prolonged pandemic. Nobody knows what direction it will take. We have not seen any significant new variants and so on, but of course that is still on the table. And so that's something we have to continue to look at and see how we can address and mitigate some of the issues there. And of course, high and rising food and fuel prices. Now, these prices predates what's happening in Ukraine and Russia, which we'll talk about in a little bit, right? We had, for example, high and rising food prices. Inflation this last year was in the region of 2.2%. And that was driven by the recovery in some of these countries I wouldn't say post-COVID, but as COVID sort of abates. You had China and some of these other countries, the USA and some of the countries picking up steam in terms of the recovery. And so there was a demand for these products and so on. And given that you had a lot of these supply chain disruptions and supply shortages and so on, you had prices of those things going up. And of course, COVID itself would have impacted the whole issue of shipping and shipping costs and freight and so on. So you had all of those issues there to really deal with in terms of the economic outlook and impact. And so that is what we are sort of facing with. Right, you would have seen some, for example, improvements in the fiscal position. We saw revenue strengthening. We saw an improvement in the implementation of the capital investment last year. And so these are positive things. But in terms of the risk to that, to the impact, as I was saying, you're talking about tightening global financial conditions. So you have interest rates, for example, going up, and how that will impact us in terms of, for example, access to credit, right? That's an important consideration, and businesses and so on, and countries like ours being able to access resources to be able to do what we want to do at reasonable and, of course, borrowed costs and that kind of thing. And then natural disasters. So there's a lot of risk to the outlook, a lot of uncertainty that we face now, and the Russia invasion of Ukraine is now a much larger shock on top of that, which is affecting very heavily the whole issue of inflation. All right, and yes, the reasons behind that, we know, for example, the area that the war is being fought is the fertile Black Sea region. You have, as you say, Ukraine and Russia accounting for more than 1/3 of wheat export. You have 1/5 of corn production and so on, export in that area. You have natural gas, a lot of things coming out of that area that supply the world, and to the extent that these things, you have supply disruption in those areas and so on, you would have impact in terms of inflation across the globe. And so these things do trickle to us. We are price takers. We don't affect price. So once the international price of these items goes up, then we will feel it here at some point in time. Now, in terms of fuel, we feel it almost immediately. Yeah, every month you have a change at the pump, and so on. You've had in recent time measures to sort of mitigate that, but of course there are things that are happening behind the scenes that we have to be mindful of, and the press conference yesterday would have highlighted the fact that given where prices are going, that government may have to relook the cap at $15 a barrel, for example. That's something that we have to look at. In terms of food and food prices and price of, for example, wheat products, bread, flour, fertilizer, corn, vegetable oils, and all of these things will also be impacted. And those are some of the items that were recently added to the exempt and zero-rated list on top of the VAT.
The VAT, yes.
And so to try to, again, mitigate the cost of these basic items, which presumably are consumed by some of the most vulnerable persons within our society. So I'll stop here in terms of response and any additional question you want to ask about.
Let me, while we add, I don't know, while we're within the Ministry of Finance, I know certainly you deal with finance, but the governments, of course, with the different ministries would collaborate on what is best in the best interest. Very often you get the sense, though, that maybe, Mike, these external shocks, it serves as an indicator that we need to pay closer attention to agriculture, eating local, producing local, or even secondary products that comes from a lot of the raw material that we have here, the breadfruit, the cassava, so that instead of having this direct reliance on importation of wheat from these external markets, maybe it should serve as an indicator to push us within that direction from a finance perspective. Does it make sense?
Well, I can't agree with you more. I mean, I think you made a very important point, and I mean, I think the strategy that as a country we should be employing is really trying to see how we can diversify our economic base and be resilient, as you rightly said. And one of the areas you can do that, of course, is to expand or find linkages between the various sectors that you have, or find value added. within some of those sectors, right? And again, as you said, being able to produce and consume locally. If you do that, then of course you reduce on your huge input bill, and we have a very large one in terms of food and some of the basic items like chicken and so on. So it's an opportunity there. Of course, these things don't happen overnight, and we have to have a deliberate strategy to be able to address some of those issues. So I quite agree with you, and I mean it's something that is on the table and could have been discussed. And you're looking at that different areas. I know the Ministry of Agriculture, for example, as you say, is doing quite a bit in terms of that, and even in terms of the Sustainable Development Plan. I mean, if you look at that within its own construct, it seeks to do that. So there's a lot there, and it's really sometimes it's implementation. I think a lot of what happens is how good are we at implementing, and I said it in last year's budget, for example, we would have seen a jump in the rate of capital investments. So that is, in a sense, is a positive sign, and to the extent that we can build on these efforts, I think we would be closer to achieving the objectives and goals of the Sustainable Development Plan.
Sustainability, there's always risk and external shocks. We talk about Ukraine. Then there is China, as it is. While here at home, we relax in more recent times. They've gone on a lockdown again. And we know China has had this zero tolerance approach to the impact of COVID. We hinted to it initially, Mike. Sources of practically everything these days, whether we probably reckon it has some connection to China, whether directly or indirectly. What are the potential challenges? We talked about it initially during the midst of the COVID. In the middle of the COVID, we felt the brunt of it. And here we are again, where there is concerns about the lockdown and its potential impact. As simple as you can, make the connection for us, Mr. Sylvester, so that the average man could really get an appreciation of what is potentially at risk here. Again,
well, I mean, there is a resurgence of as you say, virus infections and so on in China, and they are taking measures to protect the population and so on. And I mean, we saw what happened before in terms of when you have these lockdowns and how that can impact travel and how that can impact economic activity in countries like ours, especially a small country that depend to a large extent on some of these areas. So I think, as I said, that there is a risk there with respect to the pandemic being prolonged. And so on, and in fact having some negative knock-on effects and so on our country. What I can say to you in terms of how the health officials will tell you, and they of course are the ones following the science and basically provide guidance in terms of how we should respond, and so to the extent that you would see. A lot of countries are opening up. In the face of this, countries are deciding that the first option that was taken in terms of where you have a complete lockdown of the economy, that seems to be something that is not feasible at all. And so I don't foresee, and that's my opinion, I don't foresee countries going back to that kind of full lockdown kind of scenario. But there is always that need to protect the population and ensure that that you put people before other things, including economic development, money and so on. But you have to keep that in mind. But as I said, the health official will tell you much more in terms of what needs to be done in terms of following the science. But if they were to have another lockdown or to have the kind of restrictions that we had initially when the pandemic struck, I think we're going to have a significant impact on economic activity and poverty and unemployment and some of these other social indicators.
Right, and I understand, but what I was hoping that you can do in a simpler way for me, if you could make the economic connection. We're not worried about the Ministry of Health. They are going to guide us. But if you can share with us so that because we want to educate them, because sometimes the general public, they hear about lockdown in China, and then we talk about accessibility, shipping blockades, and all of these different things, and we do not quite understand the spiral effect it has on the price of our goods. So I was hoping you could probably take 2 minutes just to get people to understand the real direct implications. So at least when it comes, it doesn't hit us like, wow, I didn't see this coming.
Well, yeah. So I mean, I sort of said it in a way, but so you have I mean, we in these parts. I mean, you hear when the US or when some of these big countries sneeze, we get the cold, right? So when there are shocks in these parts, there is channels of transmission, right? In terms of this impact reaching our countries, and I gave the example of the inflation. You may have a shock in say food prices or shortage in food that would drive up the price. This may not reach here immediately, right? But we will get it. It will come because we import all of our products outside. We cannot determine the price. We are price takers. So if we import out of China, if we import out of the US and so on, that inflation is imported into Grenada. And so you would have that in your supermarket shelf. You would have that, small shops and so on, and people will feel it. The same thing with oil, right? When there's an increase in international oil price, and I'll give you an example with the fuel, right? How we calculate the fuel price here at the pump. We have what is called an automatic fuel pricing mechanism, where there's a full pass-through of the rising price into our fuel price at the pump, right? If you look at the build-up, it has the cost insurance freight, which is the landed cost of the fuel. So whatever the cost that the fuel lands here, and then of course you have the company's margins, also the importers like Sol and Roots and so on, they have a margin that's guaranteed to allow them to do the operations. You also have the dealer's margin, so the little gas station who is selling, they of course need to pay their staff and pay other people and so on. So there's a margin that's guaranteed for them, and then there's the government tax. When you look across the country, across the OECS, all of the countries have a similar mechanism. Where you might find differences are in the margins, right? So, I mean, in terms of operating costs in St. Vincent or St. Lucia and so on, they may be different. So you have differences in the margins that go to the importers and the dealers, and then you have the tax part of it. The tax part of it, again, you have somewhere ranging from $4, $3 to $5.50 and so on. So those are the difference. So you may see prices across the OECS in terms of Grenada and St. Lucia and what you have at the pump. But it's basically the same mechanism. It's just that some of the variables within there change a bit.
Okay, and it's not always as easy as saying, let me just get a different supplier for a product. It isn't that easy, is it?
No. I mean, that is you. I mean, these prices. I mean, anyway, right now, for example, you have persons or countries who used to import from, say, the same Black Sea region, so from Ukraine and Russia and some of the islands in that area there. They have started looking for other suppliers, right? You have, and those suppliers, for example, those suppliers would come at higher cost, because if I'm an importer, I would try to get the best quality at the cheapest price. So if I have to go elsewhere, and then there are other shipping constraints and freight issues and insurance and other issues and other risks in those other parts of the world. So you have to take that into account, and of course that factors into the price that actually reach us here. Because if you find another source, it might cost you more. Right. Right. You might be able to find, and then there's the whole issue of availability, whether and to what extent that they actually have. Because as we said a while ago, if Ukraine and Russia is producing or exporting 30% of the world's supply, it means that there isn't other sources out there ready to tap into.
And then you would always agree, there's always the issues of economies of scale that plays into our ability to compete in terms of what we can have access to. While for us, we might be thinking we ordering two containers of chicken, and we figure, well, that's a lot. Then you might realize, for the suppliers there's a high demand, they're getting 100 crates from some other location, and they're thinking, Little Grenada. What would you advise, though, business individuals, what should be the mindset now? Is this a good time where persons should receive greater collaborations where you decide, listen, let us come together instead of you ordering items individually? What would be the advice to cushion some of these costs?
There are a lot of, we have to, I'm not a businessman, let me say that first of all. But I think just thinking about even in our parts, and I make a general comment on that, right? Mm-hmm. For example, I might not on my own be able to own a business, a building in St. George's, right? But five friends who pool their resources together might be in a position to do so, right? But we haven't gotten to that. I don't think we have reached that mindset yet, where you need that kind of thing to be able to expand and be able to grow and build wealth and so on. So in the same way, the businessman or the businessman might want to come together and decide, let us all import. So you come together, you buy, as you say, in terms of economies of scale, and you're able to secure better markets and better prices and so on. So that might be an option, and I think somebody astute businessmen out there, I think they know that, and perhaps they've tried, I'm not sure. But that would be my advice from a layman's perspective. Yeah.
And the advice given, you don't have to take it, folks, but you have to really be able to appreciate the expression that when they sneeze, we catch the cold ultimately. In case you just joined us, this is to the point. My guest this morning, Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Finance, Mike Sylvester. Production, Mike, we talk about it, and we know it's direct electricity cost, and its direct implication that it has on the eventual on production cost. I know we've had the conversation of Grenlec has been out there. I know the last budget there was discussions that has been had, and government has started the process of offering some relief to us. And I'm saying us because very often when we hear about the relief, we think it's just for a few individuals. What can you tell us? Electricity costs, Grenlec, what's the conversation that's happening in there in terms of that in itself, prices to customers, and the divestment of Grenlec shares?
Right. So, as you know, the minister would have announced in the last budget speech the 25% reduction in the non-fuel rate, right, in terms of electricity and so on. That would have been implemented. I don't know if you have seen your last bill. I'm sure you may have. If you look at that, I think it's the left-hand corner of the bill where they have the two rates, non-fuel and the fuel. If you compare an old one with a new one, you should be able to see a difference, 25% reduction in that. So that in a sense would help or would have helped to lower your electricity bill, assuming that the consumption remained the same. And then of course you had the issue with the VAT removal on consumption below 500 kilowatt, and of course the environmental levy as well, right? So those factors or the confluence of those factors would have helped you to see a reduction in your bill, and that is all good. At the same time, what we have seen in recent times is a significant increase in the price of oil, and that would directly translate into the fuel surcharge component of it. And if you want to look at Grenlec's website, for example, they keep monthly running of the fuel surcharge. You will see, for example, that between December of last year and now, you will see, for example, an increase from 48 cents to basically 52 cents, and almost every 7th of every month they would around that time they would change that, and so you would see those increases translating into your bill. So at the end of the day, the net effect I can't say at this particular stage, but I'm pretty sure that based on what is happening now, assuming that prices remain above the $100 mark and continue to rise, you would really perhaps see an increase in pressure there with respect to higher. So we have to. I mean, I know Grenlec does a lot of information in terms of trying to conserve energy and trying to use energy. There is also the option of renewable energy. I mean, persons can there's the option of investing in solar and other renewable products that might assist in that context. And of course, buying energy efficient appliances and so on. Most of these things, the concession on those, so persons can actually utilize some of these to be able to mitigate some of the issues in that regard. But on the surface of it, I think we have to be mindful of that you would see impact there. It may mean that, I mean, I'm not sure if how long we can sustain perhaps a reduction in the 25%. But that is something that will become a real discussion at some point. Because of course, the company has to be able to function. The company cannot buy capital investments and cannot invest and cannot replace or invest in new technologies or engines and so on. It means that we may have a situation on our hands going down the road. So we have to take all of that into context.
So
all of that's happening.
So let me ask you then, Mike, before we take the break, and that's an excellent argument that you make. And while we get a reprieve, I mean, we'll be happy for it. The reality is, it can't last forever. So from a finance ministry, from a government position, are there any plans that you can share from a government's perspective that is probably being considered to mitigate the financial hardships that's each and every one of us is feeling? Because the oil prices are going to continue to rise. Ukraine, we know what's happening in there. In terms of we've hinted to that. How do we address this honestly?
Well, I mean, there are a lot of things. I mean, there's a lot of things that are mitigating factors now. I mean, for example, if you were to look at what's happening in terms of and I use the word poor and vulnerable loosely. So for example, persons who are on the seed program, for example, you would have seen that there was an increase of $150 in the benefit, temporary increase in the benefit to all the categories of persons that you're talking about 5,000 plus people that you're targeting there. There is the stimulus package, right? With support from the Caribbean Development Bank, you have support being given in terms of cash transfer, and then you also have credit support, right? So those are factors that you have mitigating the impact, the reduction in the non-fuel rate, for example. That is across the economy. So not just the household, but you have businesses in the tourism sector and manufacturing sector who they are actually faced with very high electricity costs, and right. So if you have a reduction in that, and as I said, the issue for government is how long can we sustain this? Because to be able to sustain that, you're talking about revenue losses, right? And right now, as we speak, I mean, on the fuel, for example, being capped at $15, you have significant revenue loss that the government is facing. In other words, where government should have been, collecting, $5.50 per gallon, you're talking about $3 or even right now, this month, with the price remaining at $15, you're talking about government giving up almost, $5?
And I think, Darren, Mike, that's what makes individuals the eye starts popping in their head, because government is losing. There's a lot of revenue that's been lost from all these different measures that government mitigation plans that's been implemented. You have the uncertainty as to how long it's going to last. You have increasing number of persons being dependent on the seed program, and they'd also argue that increasing numbers on the seed program is just a glaring reflection of what's happening in the economy overall.
Mm. Yeah, well, I mean, I think we have to I mean, we're in a crisis. So you would have individuals and sectors being affected in a certain way. At the same time, I think where we were last year into this year was that the economy would have been on the mend. In other words, the economy would have started showing signs of recovery. You had construction in particular growing very strongly, and you have a number of projects and so on that are going on. Agriculture, again, was very strong rebound. In the last quarter of last year, we saw a strong pickup in tourist arrivals with the relaxing of some of the things. But and then if you look at what has happened on the social side in terms of unemployment and so on, those numbers have in fact gone down. But at the same time, you have a lot of people are still suffering, and I think the support in that context has to be sustained, and until such time that those persons can find jobs and be able to restore their livelihoods and that kind of thing. And I think some of the programs that are being pursued now, like credit support, for example, to the GDP and so on and so forth, I think those are helping. You may need to expand and increase and continue for a much longer time, but then again, you have to think about where the money is going to come from to do this. There's going to have the fiscal space, and it's really a balancing act. And I mean, even on the fuel, for example, assuming that the fuel goes beyond a certain price, the government will have to be paying salt and paying roofs and so on in terms of subsidies, just so that they don't lose the margin and that you can keep the price at a certain level. So a lot of things behind the scene that's happening there that we have to take into consideration. And I think, as the minister was saying yesterday, I mean, it's really to let people understand what's happening. So if there is a move in the cap, at least persons understand that this is because of these things that are the confluence of factors that are happening behind the scenes, right, that is driving it. Otherwise, you can't sustain salaries, and you can't sustain paying of your debts, and you can't sustain X if you continue to do that. But at the same time, like I said, it's a balancing act.
A balancing act, no doubt it is, as you heard there from the PS in the Ministry of Finance, Mike Sylvester. We have to continue the conversation, but we must take a quick commercial break, and then we'll open up the lines to entertain your calls. To the point for today, the 16th day of the month of March.
Join GBN on Wednesday nights at 8 p.m. for Interesting Grenadians, a program that showcases the lives of interesting and outstanding Grenadians at home and abroad. It's Interesting Grenadians every Wednesday night at 8 p.m. on GBN. Don't you miss it.
Welcome back to the program. It is 28 minutes onto the hour in the morning time. For those of you just joining us, radio, television, across the different platforms, my guest this morning is Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Finance, Mike Sylvester. We go directly to the telephone lines. We have a caller. Good morning, caller. You're alive.
Hello, good morning.
Good morning, caller. You're alive.
Morning, yes. I realize that there most possibly will be a shift to increase the cap if the fuel prices increase globally. But on the other hand, if the fuel prices were going down, would the cap be adjusted down? Would it have been adjusted down? That's the question I'm asking. Thank you very much.
Thank you, caller. Mr. Sylvester?
So when we say cap, and that's a very good question, caller. So when we say cap, what it means is that if the price were to go over 15, then you pay 15. If it's below, then you pay below. And if you look at for example, in December when the measure was effective, the gasoline price was $16.00. Yeah, you paid $15 at the pump. At the same time, in terms of diesel was $14.00, and that's what people paid at the pump. So basically, the cap is saying that if it goes beyond a certain price, then you pay a price. But if it's below, then you basically pay the actual price. Yeah.
Thank you. Good morning, caller. You alive?
Joseph.
Yes, go ahead,
I was listening to Mia Motley in Barbados, and Mia Motley is facing the same problems like we all over the Caribbean about this fuel and etc. And she has announced a reduction on 30 items. I don't want to go into all of that. So I'm saying to you, it's proper management of a country. I understand what the permanent secretary, and I'm not blaming him because he's not the policy maker. I understand what I said about oil price and so on and whatnot. But they have to find a way to help people across the board, not only the seed program, etc. Because if she and Antigua and so on could announce all these things, if in case there's a price hike, the government should find a way. For instance, bread and all kind of thing. I hear Heath Major was saying the other day on some platform, we get wheat from, if I'm correct, from Russia. We don't get wheat from Russia. We get Ukraine. We get wheat from the United States. Yes, and I understand it's a price thing, but what I'm going back to because he was wrong, so you have to check his facts. But what I'm going back to, in terms of the general cost of living, I understand what the permanent secretary is saying, and he's not a policy maker, but there are other ways that the government could find so that across the board we wouldn't feel the effects. Do like Barbados, all of them in the same problem together, but they find other creative ways to make to alleviate the problem so that the people remember with due respect to all this, we vote all in office, and that's what we expect all this to do. You don't use the oil price and this and that to go up, and as a matter of fact, right now I think it saved the bite at $77. You don't expect things to go up today or tomorrow. Probably it might take about a couple of months. So don't just go and jack up the price and say it's oil. So I understand why they say it might be preparing people, but my main point to me is this: how Barbados and other countries could take measures to make the life easier for people, and the government has to do that so that everybody feels right across the board. We zero VAT items, etc., because that is what we vote you in office for, to take care of us.
Thank you, caller.
Right.
Mr. Sylvester?
So I mean, I can't respond to the question directly, but I mean, what I wanted to say is that I think all of the countries in the Caribbean are facing the same problem. So there's I mean, it's not like, for example, Barbados is facing a different kind of problem, and all the countries are responding. All the countries, while they are very similar in the country, you have to think about country specificity. So Barbados, for example, I mean, the price of fuel in Barbados is much higher than Grenada. And I mean, and then of course, I suppose Barbados has the same way they would have items on the exempt or zero rated list. They would have items on price control, I'm sure. So I think most of the countries are adopting a menu of measures, and they may do it at different levels based on their own specific circumstances in terms of trying to mitigate the crisis. So I'm just making a general point. I'm not responding specifically to what the caller has said. The caller has expressed her views, and we need to respect that. But I would respond in that particular way.
Good morning, caller. You're live.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning. Question, please.
Good morning, sir.
I'm not hearing very well. The volume has gone down significantly.
Yes, caller, go ahead, please.
Well, I understand Mr. Mike is saying that he's not hearing clearly. Every single word, basically, that lady just spoke applied to the conversation squarely, making all this sense. And that's the confusion we're having to analyze and put into perspective what is going on. Am I breaking up?
Go ahead, sir. We're listening.
I'm not hearing you very clearly. I don't know if you want to
I'm not breaking up, sorry. And to the extent that we have a problem to resolve with an explanation necessary related to policies concluded by the government, cabinet going through the process, remember and understand too at the same time, is not a law we're dealing with that is consistent. So policies can change in a whim. In the given situation, I don't think the government is responding to that issue as we have, to the rising cost of living. When I hear Mike say earlier on that we have a 2% inflation rate in Grenada, 2%, if I heard it right, somehow my mind is boggled. Like, hello, we have an inflation rate. When things go up from $1 to $1.50, when, for example, oil go from $6.00 to $12.00, you tell me about the inflation rate being 2% and it's kind of 4% and so on? No way. there's a need for the government to revisit the condition of our economy to the extent that you adjust and do what is critically so. And I'll give them one idea. You take out VAT on a whole lot of things, which was basically the critical aspect of dealing with our situation, that the poor people like me, I'm so poor, I can't even pronounce poor right now good. Sorry, you have to emphasize too much. And that kind of situation has to be dealt with. Giving jobs, where money going in, right down the truth. And that's what the problem is right now.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sylvester?
Yeah, thank you very much. And I mean, I thank the caller for his comment. Again, the inflation rate is the inflation rate. I mean, it's not something that is being made up. The Central Statistical Office, they are the ones that are responsible for doing the assessment, and there's a international standard that is being used. So you have items, and I mean, I just try to give a cursory explanation in terms of how it is. You have a basket of goods that is widely consumed by the population, and basically look at the changes in the price of those goods at the various establishments and so on across the country. And some of the items are weighted heavier than others, so food and fuel and so on will be weighted heavier, and you get the inflation rate. So there's a standard international methodology that is used. So I'm not when I say the rate is 2.2%, is not that you take one item and you say that will have increased by maybe 50-60%, and that is the inflation rate in a particular country. And then you have to look at, for example, the items. You may, for example, olive oil may not be in the basket. I'm just saying, right? So you have to look at these things. So I take the point, and I understand that we as I think as Ministry of Finance, a part of our job as well is really to have the conversation like this, right? Even have the technicians come on and sort of talk and explain some of these things, because I hear that comment all the time, and sometimes we have to try our best to try to explain sometimes how some of these concepts and so on they are arrived at.
Let me ask you this question, as we keep our eyes on the clock. With the global issue as it is in the conflict in Russia and Ukraine, the conversation comes up as it relates to the CBI program and its sustainability, because of course the EU and other Western allies, they're certainly trying to put restrictions literally on persons in terms of their affiliation with Russia and countries that support Russia. And the government did, of course, in a release intimate that its plans as its position on that. But it begs a bigger question, Mike. Is there any sustainability, given the pressure that the EU and other regions is applying? Is there any sustainability in the CBI program as it is?
Well, you've asked a very important question. I mean, we've had industries before that would have started in Grenada and died. We have the international business companies and so on. You would have had, and because of some of the similar pressures that you get from some of these economies. So what we have before us now is a situation where, as you say, the EU countries have passed a resolution in terms of how CBI programs in their own jurisdiction will continue, and to the extent that other countries, you really can't tell them what to do or to continue those programs, how that their policies will impact some of those programs. So it's a very pertinent, very useful question. I think for us now, we have there's a window of opportunity for us to maximize the benefits of the program as it is, while at the same time looking towards the future in terms of how we transition. To the extent that this program does not generate the kind of benefits that you want it to generate, in terms of supporting the investment and capital development and so on of the country. So you have to look at those things very carefully. The issue that's happening in Russia and Ukraine, that of course is impacting the program. We get about 20% of our files from Russia and that area there, and so it will have an impact. Yeah, but we continue to monitor the situation. We continue to ensure that we follow whatever international mandates and so on in terms of sanctions and so on, and continue to ensure that the program remains robust. I think we continue to make the point that, I mean, we have perhaps one of the best programs in terms of the due diligence and so on, and the several layers of that. Right, and even in terms of the risk profile of some of the persons that are granted citizenship and so on. So it's something that we need to look at in a very serious way in terms of how we go forward. So you asked a very important question, and I think this is a question that is occupying our minds at this particular time.
We go to the telephone lines. Good morning, caller. You're live. 15 minutes to the hour.
Let me make a bold statement and a true statement. Nothing is done in my house now except the phone. Now, I always hear people are saying about a basket of goods. Basket of goods for, not for you, Joe, for poor people. And basket of goods for rich people. Are they the same basket to determine the maybe the standard of what the cost of the goods or whatever? Now, how does it blend with looking at the standard of different people in different parts of the world? And at the same time, I'm asking myself, why is it that we in Grenada always depend on foreign goods? Is it because the people who are educating us, Joe, don't think about academic education, eh? The people who are educating us, maybe they are not doing a good job. So people don't have the idea to eat local and grow local. The one thing, as you say, that coming out from Russia, that coming out from America, so that will determine our status financially and otherwise.
Okay.
And when I look at this situation, I know you won't agree with me, Joe. Well, maybe we have bad leaders, and they are not training the people, or as you would say, educating them the right way. Everybody like the white goods, those that come out from abroad. In fact, I am asking myself, does the economy, yes, indirectly the economy of the world affect us? But why can't we build our economy by building local, growing local things and eating local things?
So let me get Mr. Sylvester to respond. And I'll also like to remind you that you spent a lot of years in the teaching profession.
No, you are assuming that.
You are a retired educator as well. So maybe you probably should consider where we are. But Mr. Sylvester,
I'm sorry. I didn't hear everything that was said.
He was making a couple assertions regarding the way we live, our choice and taste of food and everything, and our ability, that seeming preference for imported food, as to whether or not it's a direct indication that our leaders have failed us, or even our education system, how we have been taught, not necessarily us promoting eating local, buying local, and being self-sufficient.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think we have to, in terms of the buy local and so on. I mean, I think that there are a lot of points there that we can take. You know, I totally agree that we need to eat more of our local stuff. We need to eat healthier. We need to eat better. Because I was giving someone a joke one time when a lot of the illnesses that we have now, you hear it's a family disease. It's genetic, and then when you find out, it's because your mom found out from her grandmother how to cook, and so she then starts cooking for her husband. and then her children learn how to cook from her, and then they cook for the husband, and you say, it's hereditary, it's part of my family. It's not, it's really about understanding, better how these things work, and a lot of, for instance, some of the big companies and so on that trying to sell, marketing companies trying to sell, so they sell what they produce, and I think sometimes we have to educate ourselves what might be good for us. So I quite agree that we have a lot of good stuff here locally that we can eat, and that will help us in our health and so on. In terms of the basket, the basket is a basic. What you have every right now, we have the census going ahead, right? So as part of the census, they will collect information with respect to the basket itself, and the basket will be updated, because you may have a basket that is, say, 5 years old, and that you may have new items that are coming on stream that are now popularly used and regularly used, and because you have the vulnerable segments of the population and so on using that, you may want to include that in the basket, but you can't just do that arbitrarily. It has to be part of a process of updating the basket and so on, and that happens. And so out of the census, you have a new basket that will look at all of those things. And I said it's basic. They will look at what are the basic things that you use. We use a lot of things perhaps that in the basket are not good for us. We probably don't know, but we everybody uses it, and so the points are made. I think that, and I think the as you say, the caller is thinking aloud and questioning some of the things, which is fine. You're right to question some of the things. I think, for example, a lot of them our school teachers to our school system teachers to be employees. How to go to school and come out and get a job. And perhaps it should not focus on that. It should focus on trying to push out a lot of more entrepreneurs and that kind of thing. That's my personal view. So I have a view as well. So I think I'm saying all to say that there may be some truth in terms of how we look at society and make change going forward.
Thank you. We have a caller that's on the line. Good morning, caller. You're live. Hello, caller. Hello, caller. Good morning. 435-2041. That's the number on the inside. Just about 8 minutes onto the hour, Mike. The divestments of Grenlex shares. Give us an update on where we are with that, and if you can, there was a concern that was raised. And there's somebody seeking clarity too, where the finance minister may have possibly made some comments, and maybe we're asking for clarity that they wanted to get whether or not he was certain that Grenadians were or not in a position to purchase shares from Grenlex. It's a question of clarity. But if you can, just give me an update on the issue of the divestments of Grenlex shares and what are the opportunities that are available for locals to invest.
Yes, sorry, I didn't get the last. I didn't get the last part of the question.
So what I want you just to focus on for me, just give me an update on the divestment of Grenlex shares, and what are the opportunities that are available for Grenadians.
No, well, the government would have stated that the intention is to do that. Yeah, and I'm sure there is a process for that. So in terms of update, I don't know that there is anything further on that particular matter. I know the focus now is really looking at the company in terms of trying to ensure that the company is efficient, trying to improve the regulatory environment that would support the setting of tariffs and so on. There is also regulations that is being pursued to help with the transition to renewable energy, right? So I know a lot of those work, that they are ongoing or being pursued at this particular stage. I would presume that these would come before you actually have a divestment of shares, later on the road. So in terms of update, I think that's where it is at a particular moment. The government has not, from my what I've heard, I haven't heard any further statement in terms of when that would happen and so on. So,
and there's still a commitment. There's still that commitment to make shares available for Grenadians, those who are in a position to purchase.
Well, that's based on the announcement that both of us would have heard. So I'm just saying that that's the government position. I don't know if it has changed. I haven't heard a different policy direction.
5 minutes on to the hour. We have probably time just to allow this final caller. Good morning, caller. You're live.
Good morning, sir. How are you doing?
I'm wonderful, thank you. Question, please.
The caller before, right, he leave out one thing. Coal. You know, we are so sufficient in coal right now. A tin of coal is $10. And to me, we have no problem at all. With oil. If people just stop and think for a minute, Grenada is a paradise. And I just want to make a comment.
Okay,
right?
Nicholas, people, I'm not hearing at all. I'm really hearing.
You're not hearing at all. I'm just saying that we don't have a problem here in Grenada when it comes to oil and gas. We have enough coal here. A tin of coal is $10. It can last you a whole month. Yeah? And I want Grenada to know that Mike Sylvester and Dennis Cornwall has been holding that office, permanent secretary of the Ministry of Finance, and their brothers. So you have two brothers holding that office for a period of time. So Grenada have what you call a record. So the history book has the right and say that two brothers have held that office for a period of time. Yes? Have a nice day, sir.
Mike, 3 minutes on to the hour. Your thoughts? Do you any comments on that?
You asked me to wrap. You asked me to.
No, I'm just asking whether or not you wanted to comment on make any comments on that.
No comments.
No comments on this. Well, I'm going to give you the last few minutes just to encapsulate our conversation before you leave. 2 minutes to wrap.
Right. So, I mean, thank you very much. I think let me thank the callers for the very interesting, very pointed questions and points that would have been raised. As I said, I think the conversation was a very good one. The intent of the discussion today, I think, is really to bring awareness to what is happening and how that might potentially affect us. Right. At this particular point, for example, there are some measures in place to mitigate the impact of high and rising food and fuel prices on the economy and on individuals and so on. It's something that you have to manage. Now, I mean, our role as technicians and so on is to continue to monitor and review the situation and provide advice to the policymakers to sort of help manage the economy in a particular way. In every society, everybody would have a lot of different views and so on. So you have to, of course, respect that and take that into account. So I think it's just to, I wouldn't say put on notice because, as the minister would have said, if the price were to continue to increase, you may have to, government may have to consider an increase in the cap. I can't say what that is going to be. The cabinet, of course, would determine that. In terms of Grenelec and the non-fuel rate, I can't say how long that will continue. We could make recommendation. The cabinet will eventually decide. So I'm just saying that there are measures that are there. You may need more, and depending on how the international economy, how the crisis and so on that is ongoing in Ukraine and Russia unfolds, that you may have a serious negative impact here. And as any country, you have to adjust. Yeah? I mean, I would not be as in terms of baseline scenario, be as negative as and say that we're going to go back into some kind of recession and so on and so forth. But I mean, that's the risk that every country around the world face, right? You have a lot of these risks that have not gone away, and in fact they would have multiplied. and we have to go through them, right? Persons who are, for example, fleeing Ukraine and so on. I don't know if they even had that in their mind a few months ago, right? But they are in a particular situation now, which they have to deal with. So we have to be able to adjust and navigate and basically, at the end of the day, find a way to come out at the end of the tunnel in a much better position. And that is why, for example, they need to build resilience. We have to build resilience in our country. And resilience would help us to not depend on, for example, the whole issue of oil price. If we want to move into renewable, where we have, for example, geothermal resources available here that we can exploit. We have tons of solar, sun, wind, If we have those and we can actually invest in those, then you have stable price and you have a low price for very long. You know what I'm saying? So these are the things that we need to look at to sort of transform our economy. We have a lot of potential here, and I think we need to find the best strategy to be able to exploit and to be able to build on those.
We'll have to leave the conversation there for now. Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Finance, Mike Sylvester. Mike, it was a pleasure. Looking forward for us having this discourse another time. All the best to you. All the best to you.
Thank you very much. And
well, listeners, viewers, as you've heard, the PS said we're in a crisis, but we have to do what we can. We have to, each and every one of us have to play a part. I want to say thanks to our listeners and our viewers, wherever you are. Thanks for being part of the program as you continue to play your part, you, me, each and every one of us, for a more sustainable Grenada and more sustainable region and better lives for each and every one of us. All the best. JC loves you. Take care.